So last thing we're going to look at is writing equations of perpendicular lines. All right. So let's say I put in an equation like 3x plus 2. What's the slope in that equation that I just did? 3. And what's the y-intercept? 2. So based on what we just said about parallel lines, can somebody tell me any line that you want that would be parallel to 3x plus 2?
3x minus 4.
Minus 4. Perfect. So there's the line 3x plus 2, crosses the y-axis at 2. And there's the line 3x minus 4. It crosses at minus 4. But they're parallel. Okay? They don't cross because they have the same slope, different y-intercepts. Okay. What we're going to look at today is doing something like this. I'm going to put in 2 lines. Actually, I'm going to do it like this. Isn't my divided working? There we go. 1/3 x plus 4. Right. I want you to see what these look like. So we're going to have 2 lines. The first one I kept the same, but the second one I changed. Okay. Are those parallel? No. They cross each other. They cross each other. And does anyone have a guess how big this angle is right here that I just circled? 90. Yeah, it is. It's exactly 90 degrees. When 2 lines cross each other at exactly 90 degrees, so when they make a plus sign, that's called perpendicular. Okay? If they cross each other like this, that's not perpendicular. They cross, but in order for them to be perpendicular, they have to make like a plus or like a capital T. You know, it's got to be perfectly 90 degrees. So look at the 2 lines I did. Oops. Let's see if I can not block the 3. Okay. This was the slope of the first one. Okay. It was a 3. The slope of the other one was a negative 1/3. Does anyone see a connection between those 2 numbers?
They both have 3.
All right, they both have a 3 in them. Let me maybe write it like that.
They're reversed. Yeah.
Reciprocal.
That's part of it. They are reciprocals. This one has been flipped. And what else? It's the opposite. So 2 things happened. The number was flipped, and then we made it the opposite. That's how you draw perpendicular lines. Okay. So that's what we're going to write that down on our notes. Right. So we've talked about parallel lines, perpendicular lines. I already showed you guys a picture. I guess if you want to draw a picture of perpendicular lines, you could, kind of off to the side, maybe next to the 1 or 2. But they look exactly like we showed right there. Let's see. You don't have to write that down. So perpendicular lines, they cross and they form a 90-degree angle. That's also called a right angle. So when you take geometry, you'll study more about angles and that kind of stuff. Right? So what we just figured out is there is a special relationship between perpendicular lines. The slopes are flipped and they're the opposite. And that's what we're going to put down in our notes. So where it says if 2 lines are perpendicular, then their slopes are, you have 2 blanks on your guided notes. On line 1, put opposite. And on line 2, put reciprocal. All right, let's make one up. Let's say I had 3/2. I want to do two things to it. I want to make it the opposite. So that's what's going to go on your first blank. And then I want to flip it. Okay. What number would I get if I made 3 over 2 the opposite and then flipped it?
Negative 2/3.
Yep, negative 2/3. If I were to draw 2 lines on the calculator with those slopes, they would cross and they would make a plus sign. So that's just one example of 2 numbers that are opposites and flipped. It's got to be both. They can't just be opposites, and they can't just be flipped. It has to be both opposite and flipped. Okay, any question on that? Once you know that, that's the only thing that's different from yesterday. Right? That's the only thing. Everything else is going to be exactly the same. All right. So, when we have to write down something to get an equation of a line, what's the format that we've been using? Not the y equals mx plus b, but what's the other one? Yep.
Is it like y minus y1?
Yep. Y minus, it's called point slope, and what is it again?
It's y minus y1 equals x1 minus, or no, equals m minus
M.
x1.
And what comes after the m?
Oh, so parentheses.
Parenthesis. Yep. And then x.
x2. x1 minus x1.
Minus x1. Okay, so y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So where you guys have a box and it says use the same formula as earlier, you can put y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1 in the box. Okay, let's just go over each part of the formula. And it's going to be very, very similar to what we did yesterday. Okay. Let's start with the y. What happens to the y? What happens? Nothing. Nope. Y stays the same. So where you have a blank line, you can put y, colon, and then right next to it, you can put stays as y. So we're not plugging anything in for that. The next thing in the formula is the y1. Is the y1, when we have a coordinate, is it the number before the comma or after the comma?
After?
Yep. So y1 is the number that comes after the comma in the coordinate that they give you. So just like yesterday, I'm going to give you a coordinate, take the number that comes after the comma, and use that as y1. Okay, so we got the y, we got the y1. What's the next letter that comes after y1? M. And what's m? That's my slope. Now, this is where it's a little different. Yesterday, we wanted parallel. So we looked at the line they gave us, and we said, oh, okay, the slope they gave me is 1/2. I'm going to use 1/2 in my line because I wanted them to be the same. Well, now we're going to do perpendicular. So we're not just going to copy down that 1/2. We're going to take the 1/2 and we're going to find the opposite reciprocal. That's going to be my slope. Okay, so when they ask you to do perpendicular, it's a little bit more work with the slope. Don't just copy it down. Find the opposite reciprocal. Remember, opposite means to change it from like a positive to a negative or negative to positive. And reciprocal means to flip it. That's the only thing that's different in all the steps on your guiding notes. Okay, what's the next letter that comes after M? X. And what are we doing with the X? Nothing. Stays the same. Okay, so X is just going to stay as X. Don't plug anything in for X. All right, and then what's our last letter in the formula? X1. And where does that come from?
First number in the parentheses.
Yep. It's going to be the first number that's in that coordinate. So you're going to look at the coordinate that I give you, and you're going to write down the number before the comma. And what's this format called again? This y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. What's the name of it?
Point slope.
Point slope. If they ask you to go one more step and change it from point slope to slope intercept, can someone remind me what's the first thing you have to do on the right? And we wrote it down yesterday, so I didn't really put a spot on here for today.
Distribute.
Yep, first thing you have to do is distribute. That's on the right side. And what's the last thing you have to do?
Subtract the number to, I said y.
Yeah, so then we got to get the y by itself. So you either have to add or subtract. It's one of the two. So if you want to write those two steps, you could put them. You could put them anywhere if you don't remember them. But those are the two steps to write point slope, changing it to slope intercept. Distribute, and then get y by itself. And we practiced that on my homework. We did one. Okay. So any questions, or anyone need me to scroll back up so you can write down the what goes on each line? Okay, so before we start doing the equations of lines, let's just practice taking a number, finding the opposite, and then the opposite reciprocal. Okay, so I'll do the first one with you guys, and then I'll give you a few more to kind of try on your own. Let's start with 2/3. What's the opposite of 2/3? Negative 2/3. And now take that one more step and tell me the opposite reciprocal. So what's the opposite reciprocal of 2/3? Yep, -3/2. Perfect. So that's the opposite of the number, and that's the opposite flipped. So if I drew a line, and one of them had this slope, and the other one had this slope, what kind of lines would they be? Well, the slopes are opposite reciprocals, but the lines would be... They would intersect. Can you be more specific?
Perpendicular.
Perpendicular, yes. Yep, they would be perpendicular. Doesn't matter what the y-intercepts are. Okay, so I'll just do an example. Let's do 2/3 x as my first slope. So 2/3 x, and then we could pick any y-intercept we want, 2. And now let's put in the other one. -3/2 x. And you guys pick a y-intercept for me.
4.
4. Doesn't matter what you use. Okay, let's graph it. Okay, here's the -2/3 x. And one of them, that's the -2/3, and then or -3/2, and the +2/3. And does it look like they cross at a 90-degree angle?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have mattered what intercept you used. If you made this a +1, it'd still cross at a 90-degree angle. It would just cross a little bit lower. Okay, so now it's going to be more down here. It's still perpendicular. So the y-intercept is not important for perpendicular. So why don't you guys try those 3. See if you can give me the opposite of each number, and then the opposite reciprocal. Good. Let's start with a -3/5. What's the opposite of -3/5? Yep.
3/5.
3/5. And then what's the opposite reciprocal? Yep.
5/3.
5/3. Yep. Perfect. All right. Let's do 2. What's the opposite of 2?
-2.
-2. And now what do you get if you flip that?
-2/1.
Well, that's what it is now, -2/1. And we need to flip it. -1/2. Yep. All right, now let's look at the 0. What's the opposite of 0?
0.
0. Now, okay, so the opposite of 0 is 0. Now, when you take 0 and you flip it, okay, think of like this as being in a fraction. When you flip that, where does the 0 end up? Ends up in the bottom. And what happens if you try to divide by 0? It's undefined, right? Another way you could think about it is, what kind of line has a slope of 0?
Horizontal.
Horizontal. What would be perpendicular to a horizontal line?
A 0.
A what?
Vertical.
A vertical line. And the slope of a vertical line is undefined. Okay? So it's undefined. Any question on that table? Okay, so let's flip over to the back. And we'll do example 2 together, and then I might have you guys try example 3. So it says, write an equation of a line that passes through the point -3, 1 and is perpendicular to the line. So the only word that changed here from yesterday is we changed parallel to perpendicular. Right, so let's start with the formula. Okay, what's the formula that we're going to plug everything into?
Y equals, not y negative. Y1 equals m parentheses x minus x1.
Yep. So that's what we're going to plug everything into. So off to the side, I'm going to write down what the 3 things are we need. Okay. What is x1 going to be?
-3.
-3. Right? That's the number that comes before the comma. Right? That's the number before the comma. How about y1?
1.
1. Okay, the number that comes after the comma. And now the slope. Here's the line that they gave us, and we want to be perpendicular to that line. Okay. So what's the slope of the line they gave us?
1.5.
Right. So for the given line, the given slope is a half. Does that mean that our slope is also a half? No.
That's different.
If we made our slope a half, it would be parallel. So our slope cannot be 1/2. What are the two things we have to do with that number?
Flip it.
Flip it
Think opposite.
and make it the opposite. So what's our slope going to be?
2 over 1 or 2?
Well, if you flip it, it's 2 over 1. You still got to do one more thing.
Negative.
Negative.
-2.
Yep. So our slope is going to be -2. Right? And slope is which letter?
X.
And
Yeah. Okay. That's the only thing you have to remember to do, only because it says perpendicular. If it said parallel, our slope would have been 1/2. Let's fill it all in. So we have y minus, what's y1?
1.
1 equals, okay, what's m?
-2.
-2. Okay, what's going to come after the parenthesis?
X plus -3.
Right, it's going to be
Oh,
x,
just -3. -3.
not x minus 3.
X 1 plus 3.
So what should we put first?
Minus
Yeah, let's just put the minus. And then what should we put?
3.
-3.
-3. Okay, so it's x minus -3. And now that turns into
Plus 3.
that turns into a +3. Yep. And it didn't say whether you needed point slope or slope intercept. So we'll just do this one in point slope. And then the next one I'll have you guys do the next step to distribute it and change it to slope intercept. All right. So any question on that one? One disadvantage to the point slope is if I wanted to put this in on my calculator, I can't. My calculator only lets me put equations in y equals mx plus b. So if you use one of these calculators, you have to change it to point slope intercept. Just the way it works. All right. So any question on that? Okay. All right. So why don't you guys try this one? So I'm giving you an equation. I'm telling you that the point that it has to pass through is -3,5. And I want it to be perpendicular. Make sure you read that carefully. It could say perpendicular or it could say parallel on the test. Okay, this one I want perpendicular to y equals -3x minus 1. So I would write your formula and then write down a chart on the side for the three things that you need to figure out. x1, y1, and m1. Okay, and we'll walk around and kind of check in with you guys as you try to do that. All right, so let's start to take a look at this one. So first thing, if you get stuck, you always want to do is write down the formula that you need. Okay, what's the formula that we're going to write down? Just with letters. You don't have to fill anything in yet.
Y minus y1 equals m parentheses x minus
Okay, so there's our formula. And then off to the side, we usually just make a little table for the three things we have to find. What are the three things we need to
x1,
find?
y1,
So we need the x1, the y1, and the m. Okay, so let's read the problem and see if we know any of them. Do they give us the x1?
-3.
Yeah, the x1 is the number before the comma, so that's -3. How about the y1?
5.
The number after the comma. Okay, and now, what's the slope that they gave us?
-3.
Right, they gave us a slope of -3. So does that mean we want our slope to also be -3? No, not for perpendicular. Parallel, yes, not perpendicular. What does that mean we have to do to this to get our slope? What are the two things?
Opposite and opposite.
Yep, so the opposite and then flip it. So what's the opposite of -3?
3.
3. And then what do you get if you flip the number 3?
1/3.
1/3. That's our slope. It's the opposite reciprocal. And slope is L. Okay, so any questions on how we got x1, y1, or L?
How do you get 5?
5, that's the number that comes after the
Oh.
comma in the point.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so now we'll fill them in. Okay, we're going to do y minus, what comes next?
5.
5. And right after the 5, we put equals. And then after that,
3.
put your slope, 1/3. Okay,
Parentheses.
parenthesis.
X.
Yep.
Minus -3.
X minus -3. Yep. And what's going to happen with the x minus -3?
It's going to become a positive.
Yep. It's going to become a positive. Okay. So that's point slope. Now I asked you guys on this one to go one more step and change it to slope intercept.
Distributive.
Yep. First thing you have to do is distribute. So nothing happens on the left yet. What's 1/3 times x?
1/3.
1/3 x. And what's 1/3 times 3?
1.
1. Yep. Okay, is that y equals mx plus b?
No.
Not quite. You're still going to get y by itself.
You have to add 5 to both sides.
So, yep. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. -5 plus 5, that's gone. And what do we have on the right side now?
1/3 x plus 6.
1/3 x plus 6. Okay. And that's the equation of the line that's perpendicular to the one they gave us. And we can check that. I'm going to type it in on the calculator and let's see if they look like a plus sign. Yeah, yeah, just sign out. Okay, so I already typed in the original, -3x plus 1. I'm going to put in 1/3 x plus 6. And let's see how they look. Okay, so that's the original. And how about the one we found? Does it look like they cross at 90-degree angles?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So you're not going to have to check it on the graphing calculator. We do use these calculators for one thing later on, but we're not really using them. I'm just doing it to show you what perpendicular looks like. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay. So, the last one we have, font's a little small, hopefully you can read it a little better on your paper. But it says, the city council of a town wants to make a new boardwalk along the beach, and they want the boardwalk, I tried to make mine look a little bit more bold, because it's hard to tell on the photocopy a little which one is bold. That's the bold one. Okay. So they want the boardwalk. So this is going to be the boardwalk. to be perpendicular to the road that goes to the beach. Okay, this is the road. So they want to make a boardwalk that's perpendicular to the road. So it says write an equation for the boardwalk. So I want an equation for that thing in black. All right, so we have two types of equations, right? We've got the point slope and we've got the slope intercept. If you want to use this equation, we can use that one. But what do you have to know if you want to use this equation that I haven't been giving you in the last few problems?
The y-intercept.
Right, you need the y-intercept, and that's not something that we've had in any of the problems today or yesterday. But we did on, I think it was Monday, we had it. When you look at two coordinates, does anybody remember how you identify if the slope-intercept is given to you? It would always be the number with
The 0.
the 0. Do you have a coordinate with a 0 here?
Yes.
Yes. Then you don't have to use point slope. You can use slope intercept. Okay. So here's our two coordinates. I'm just going to write them a little bigger. Which one, what's the number that's with the 0?
-4.
-4. And what's that called again? That's your
Y-intercept.
y-intercept. And what letter is that?
B.
B. Perfect. Okay, so we already have B. I need one other thing to finish that formula. What do I need besides B?
M.
I need M. Okay, I need the M. So I'm trying to find the equation for the boardwalk. So we're looking at the line in bold. M is the slope. I need the slope of that bold line. Well, to find slope, how many points do you need on the line? Or how many points do we always use when we find slope? We always use 2. Do you have 2 points on the bold line?
Yes. No.
No, you only have 1. You have 1 right there. So we can't directly find the slope of the bold line. But what do we know about the bold line and the road?
What if they're perpendicular?
We know they're perpendicular. Do we have 2 points on the line for the road?
Yes.
Yes. Then we can find the slope of the road. Right? And we know the road is perpendicular to the boardwalk. So if we can find the slope of the road, we can then fix it to be perpendicular. And that's what we did earlier. So let's find the slope of the road. Even though it's not what we want, because they want the boardwalk, I can't find the boardwalk. I don't have enough points to figure out the boardwalk. So I'm going to have to figure out the road first. Okay, so we'll set up our formula. Let's call this x2, x1, y2, y1. Okay, so we're going to find the slope of the road. What would go in the top to find the slope of the road?
Y2.
Y2 minus
Y1.
Y1. Okay. And what goes in the bottom?
0. Oh wait, no.
5, right? X2 minus
0.
X1. Okay. What's 1 minus minus 4?
5.
Right. It's going to become 1 plus 4. which is 5. What's 5 minus 0? 5. And when you divide 5 by 5, what do you get?
1.
1. Okay. That's the slope of the road. We really need the slope of the what? We need the slope of the boardwalk. And what's the connection between the road and the boardwalk? They're perpendicular. So what would you have to do to that number to make it the slope of the boardwalk, knowing it's perpendicular? You'd have to do 2 things to it. Yep. So the slope of the boardwalk, it's going to be the opposite reciprocal of that number. Okay. What's the opposite?
-1.
-1. So the opposite is -1. And what's the opposite reciprocal? What do you get if you flip -1?
1 -1 over 1.
Yeah, it stays the same. Because -1, you could think of it as -1 over 1. If you flip it, it becomes 1 over -1. That's the same thing. So when you flip that, there's no change. So that is the slope of the boardwalk, and that's the slope that we wanted. Okay, so you have to find the road first, then the boardwalk. Okay, so now I have the M and I have the B. So what would be my final answer? To write the equation for the boardwalk using the slope and the intercept that I have.
Y equals -1x minus 4.
Yep, perfect. Y equals -1x minus 4. Yep. Any question on that? Right, so a little bit different, but really still based on what we learned today. Okay, you just have to think about how to get that slope. How about finish up, and you guys try that one. You don't have to change it to. You don't have to change it to slope intercept. You can leave your final answer as point slope. And then just put that in the practice A box, and this will be the last one we do. We'll be all done. All right, so let's identify our 3 things. Okay, what's x1 going to be? 6. And y1?
1.
1. And the given slope is -3/5. What number would be perpendicular to -3/5?
5 over 3.
5 over 3. Yep. Now we just have to write our final answer. Okay, what comes first?
Y
Yep, and then right after y, minus. And then in this case, y1. Sam, what comes after the equal sign?
The x, and in this case it would be 5 over 3.
5 over 3. And Madeline, right after the 5 over 3, we put parenthesis. And Molly, right after the parenthesis.
6 minus, or no, x minus 6.
Yep, and then x minus 6, and one more thing.
Parentheses.
Parenthesis. Okay. So remember, homework for tonight is the 4.3 Part 2 worksheet. We've got about 7 minutes, so what I'm going to try to do is put the test topics on the board right now. So that way you'll know exactly the kinds of problems. Okay, just give me a minute, I'll pause the video and put those